What happened to the luxurious Encino mansion that once echoed with laughter from one of television's most beloved stars? Robert Guillaume, the Emmy-winning actor who made millions laugh as Benson, left behind more than just memories. His abandoned estate tells a heartbreaking story of triumph, tragedy, and the cruel reality of fame's fleeting nature. From humble beginnings to Broadway dreams, some stories begin in mansions, but Robert Guillaume's started in a cramped St. Louis tenement where dreams seemed impossible and survival was the only goal. Born Robert Peter Williams on November 30th, 1930, he entered a world that offered little hope for a black child in Depression-era Missouri. His mother, a hardworking seamstress named Jeanette, struggled to make ends meet on her meager income, stitching clothes for wealthy families, while her own son wore hand-me-downs. The most devastating blow came early when his father abandoned the family, leaving behind only questions and a deep wound that would shape Robert's entire life. When times became too difficult, young Robert was sent to live with his grandmother, a woman whose strength and faith would become the foundation of his character. In her small home, surrounded by the smell of Sunday cooking and the sound of gospel music, Robert discovered something that would change everything. His voice. It wasn't just any voice, it was rich, powerful, and filled with an emotion that seemed far too mature for such a young boy. The local church became Robert's first stage. Standing in the choir, wearing his only good shirt, he discovered that when he sang, people listened, really listened. The same voice that had once been silenced by poverty and abandonment now commanded attention and respect. Word spread through the neighborhood about the boy with the golden voice, and soon local theater groups began inviting him to audition. But singing in church was one thing. Making a living from entertainment was entirely different, especially for a young black man in the 1940s. Robert took the practical path, securing a steady job with the Postal Service. It paid the bills and offered security that his childhood had never provided. For years, he sorted mail by day and performed in small clubs by night, living a double life that satisfied neither his practical needs nor his artistic dreams. Then came the moment that would define his entire future. Standing in that post office, surrounded by endless stacks of letters and packages, Robert made a decision that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. He would leave everything behind and move to New York City to pursue acting professionally. Friends called him crazy. His family worried he was throwing away a good job for an impossible dream. The early years in New York were brutal. Robert performed in tiny off-Broadway theaters for audiences of 20 people, slept in cramped apartments with multiple roommates, and survived on little more than determination and raw talent. He took whatever roles he could find, learning his craft one small part at a time, building the skills that would eventually make him a household name. Little did anyone know that this struggling young actor would one day own a mansion in the hills of California, only to see it all slip away in the most heartbreaking circumstances imaginable. From soap opera star to household name. After years of struggling in small theaters, Robert Guillaume's big break came from the most unexpected place, daytime television, where housewives and college students would first fall in love with his commanding presence. In 1973, Guillaume landed the role of Dr. Franklin Grant on the popular soap opera All My Children. This wasn't just any soap opera role. Dr. Grant was intelligent, respected, and complex, a far cry from the stereotypical parts typically offered to black actors at the time. Guillaume brought dignity and depth to the character, earning a devoted following among daytime viewers who had never seen an African-American doctor portrayed with such authenticity and respect on television. But Guillaume's soap opera success was just the beginning. In 1977, television producer Susan Harris was creating a groundbreaking comedy called Soap, a satirical take on daytime dramas that would push every boundary imaginable. She needed an actor who could deliver razor-sharp wit while maintaining an air of sophistication and intelligence. Guillaume auditioned for the role of Benson Dubois, the sarcastic butler who worked for the wealthy Tate family. The character of Benson was unlike anything television had seen before. Yes, he was a butler, but he was also the smartest person in every room. His cutting remarks and quick wit made him the show's breakout star almost immediately. While other characters stumbled through ridiculous storylines, Benson remained the voice of reason, delivering one-liners that had audiences across America laughing and cheering. Guillaume's portrayal was so captivating that something unprecedented happened in television history. After just 2 seasons on soap, network executives at ABC made an extraordinary decision. They would create an entirely new show built around Guillaume's character. Benson premiered in 1979, following the butler as he left domestic service to work in the governor's mansion as a political advisor. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. Here was an African-American actor, not just starring in his own television series, but playing a character who was respected, intelligent, and held real power. Benson Dubois wasn't just comic relief or a supporting character. He was the star, the hero, the person viewers looked to for wisdom and humor week after week. Benson became a massive hit, running for 7 successful seasons and earning Guillaume both critical acclaim and serious money. The show's success transformed him from a working actor into a wealthy television star, with syndication deals and residual payments that would generate income for decades to come. Guillaume had achieved something remarkable. He had become one of the most recognizable faces on American television. But as Guillaume would soon discover, television success came with its own unique pressures, and the higher he climbed, the farther there was to fall, when the industry inevitably moved on to the next big thing. Living like royalty in the hills of Encino. By the mid-1980s, Robert Guillaume had transformed from a struggling postal worker into one of Hollywood's wealthiest television stars, and he decided to buy a home that would prove just how far he had traveled from those cramped St. Louis tenements. The mansion Guillaume purchased in the prestigious hills of Encino, California, cost him over $1 million, a staggering sum that represented everything his childhood self could never have imagined. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement. The sprawling estate featured 7 luxurious bedrooms and 8 full bathrooms, each one larger than the entire apartment he had shared with his grandmother decades earlier. From the master suite, Guillaume could look out over panoramic views of the San Fernando Valley, watching the lights twinkle below like stars fallen to earth. The property itself was a wonderland of wealth and success. A sparkling swimming pool dominated the backyard, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that required a full-time staff to maintain. Guillaume had his own tennis court installed, where he could play matches with fellow celebrities and industry executives. The house featured a state-of-the-art entertainment system, a wine cellar, and multiple living areas designed for hosting the kind of parties that would become legendary in Hollywood circles. At this peak of his career, Guillaume's net worth soared to an estimated $8 million. The money flowed from multiple sources: Benson residuals that arrived like clockwork, guest appearances on other shows, and endorsement deals that capitalized on his wholesome, intelligent image. But Guillaume wasn't content to rest on his television success. He began exploring voice acting, lending his distinctive baritone to animated projects that would reach entirely new audiences. The parties at Guillaume's Encino mansion became the stuff of Hollywood legend. A-list celebrities, powerful producers, and entertainment industry royalty would gather in his living room, dining on catered delicacies while enjoying views that stretched for miles. These weren't just social gatherings, they were networking events, where million-dollar deals were struck over cocktails, and laughter echoed through rooms that had once seemed impossible for a poor kid from Missouri to ever enter. Guillaume's greatest voice acting triumph came in 1994, when Disney cast him as Rafiki in The Lion King. His portrayal of the wise baboon became iconic, with his pronunciation of Simba and delivery of "Remember Who You Are," touching millions of hearts worldwide. The film's massive success generated additional millions in royalties, pushing Guillaume's wealth to heights that seemed unshakable. Standing in his mansion, surrounded by success and luxury, Guillaume appeared to have achieved the American dream in its most extravagant form. He had money, fame, respect, and a home that represented the pinnacle of achievement. But as Guillaume would soon learn, even the most beautiful mansions built on Hollywood success can become prisons when fortune begins to fade and health starts to fail, when success couldn't mask the growing darkness. The first sign that Guillaume's fairy tale life was about to crumble came not from a doctor's office or a financial advisor, but from a morning newspaper that delivered news no actor ever wants to read. In 1986, Robert Guillaume and his entire Benson cast discovered their show had been canceled in the most brutal way imaginable, through entertainment reporters rather than network executives. After 7 successful seasons, ABC had decided to end the series without even informing the people who had made it a hit. Guillaume learned that his steady paycheck and the foundation of his wealth had vanished while reading the entertainment section over his morning coffee in his Encino mansion. The cancellation was more than just a professional disappointment. It marked the beginning of a harsh reality that many successful actors face, but few discuss openly. Guillaume was now in his mid-50s, an age when Hollywood begins treating even beloved stars as relics from a bygone era. The phone calls from agents became less frequent. The script offers grew smaller and less appealing. The entertainment industry that had once celebrated Guillaume's intelligence and wit now seemed more interested in younger faces and fresher voices. But the real nightmare began in the early 1990s, when Guillaume received devastating news during a routine medical checkup. He had prostate cancer. The diagnosis hit him like a physical blow, not just because of the health implications, but because of what it meant for his ability to work and earn money. Cancer treatment was expensive, exhausting, and unpredictable. The disease would plague him for decades, requiring constant medical attention and astronomical bills that began eating away at his carefully accumulated wealth. Guillaume discovered a painful truth that many wealthy people learn too late. Money that seems infinite can disappear with shocking speed when faced with serious medical expenses. The residual checks from Benson continued arriving, but they weren't enough to cover the mounting costs of treatments, medications, and specialized care. The $8 million net worth that had once seemed unshakable began showing cracks as Guillaume was forced to dip into savings and investments to pay for his survival. The social invitations that had once filled his calendar began to dwindle. Partly, this was due to Hollywood's cruel habit of forgetting yesterday's stars, but partly it was Guillaume's own choice. He began withdrawing from the party circuit, spending more time alone in his mansion. The house that had once been filled with laughter and conversation grew quieter. The tennis court saw fewer matches. The swimming pool reflected an increasingly solitary figure. Friends who visited during this period noticed a change in Guillaume's demeanor. The quick wit and sharp humor were still there, but underneath was a new vulnerability, a recognition that the security he had worked so hard to build was more fragile than he had ever imagined. What none of his visitors could have predicted was how much darker and more devastating Guillaume's story would become in the years ahead. The mansion that became a prison. On a seemingly ordinary morning in 1999, Robert Guillaume's world changed forever when he suffered a massive stroke that transformed his luxurious Encino estate from a symbol of success into a gilded cage he could never truly escape. The stroke left Guillaume partially paralyzed on his left side, robbing him of the physical grace and commanding presence that had made him such a compelling performer. More devastating still, it affected his speech, creating a slight slur that made the crystal-clear diction he was famous for nearly impossible to achieve. For a man whose voice had been his fortune, this was nothing short of catastrophic. The same vocal cords that had brought Rafiki to life and delivered Benson's razor-sharp wit now struggled with simple conversations. The financial implications became clear almost immediately. Guillaume's voice-acting career, which had provided millions in income from The Lion King and other animated projects, effectively ended overnight. Studios that had once competed for his services now looked elsewhere for clearer, more reliable voices. The residual checks from his television work continued, but they were nowhere near enough to cover the staggering costs of his new reality. Round-the-clock medical care became a necessity, not a luxury. Guillaume required physical therapists, speech therapists, nurses, and specialized equipment that cost thousands of dollars every month. The mansion that had once hosted Hollywood's elite now buzzed with the constant presence of medical professionals. Hospital beds replaced elegant furniture. The sounds of laughter and conversation were replaced by the beeping of monitors and the quiet efficiency of healthcare workers. Donna Guillaume, his devoted wife, faced an impossible situation. She watched helplessly as her husband's condition demanded more resources than their remaining wealth could provide. The couple was forced to make heartbreaking decisions that would have seemed unthinkable just years earlier. Valuable artwork that had adorned their walls was quietly sold to private collectors. Expensive jewelry disappeared from Donna's collection. Even furniture and decorative items that held precious memories were sacrificed to pay for Guillaume's care. The isolation became almost complete. The tennis court fell into disuse, its nets sagging and courts developing cracks. The swimming pool, once the centerpiece of legendary parties, now seemed like a cruel reminder of more active days. Guillaume spent most of his time in a single room of the vast house, surrounded by medical equipment and the constant presence of caregivers who, despite their kindness, could never replace the friends and colleagues who had gradually drifted away. Donna found herself becoming not just a wife, but a full-time caregiver, financial manager, and the sole guardian of her husband's dignity. She watched their savings dwindle month by month, knowing that each payment for medical care brought them closer to a financial precipice that once seemed impossible. The mansion that had once symbolized Guillaume's triumph over poverty and prejudice had become something far more ominous. A beautiful prison where every day brought new evidence of how quickly a lifetime of success could slip away. Behind the gates of a crumbling dynasty. Visitors who had once marveled at Guillaume's pristine Encino estate would have been shocked to see what the mansion had become by the early 2000s, a slowly decaying monument that neighbors whispered about behind closed doors. The most obvious signs of decline were visible from the street. The perfectly manicured gardens that had once been Guillaume's pride began showing patches of brown grass and overgrown hedges. The ornate iron gates that protected the property developed rust stains that nobody seemed to notice or care about anymore. Paint on the mansion's exterior started peeling in places, creating an oddly melancholy appearance that made the once grand home look tired and forgotten. Neighbors in the affluent Encino community began noticing disturbing changes in the Guillaume property. Where music and laughter had once drifted over the walls during weekend gatherings, an eerie silence now dominated the estate. The tennis court, which had hosted matches with Hollywood celebrities, sat empty for months at a time. Weeds began growing through cracks in the court surface, and the net eventually disappeared altogether. The most telling sign of the family's financial distress came through mysterious staff layoffs that happened gradually but consistently. The full-time gardener who had maintained those stunning landscapes suddenly stopped appearing. The housekeeper who had kept every room spotless was quietly let go. Even the pool maintenance service was canceled, leaving the once crystal swimming pool to develop an unsettling green tint that could be glimpsed through gaps in the deteriorating privacy fencing. Guillaume and Donna became increasingly reclusive, rarely venturing beyond their property lines. Neighbors reported seeing medical vehicles arriving at all hours, but the family themselves seemed to vanish from public view almost entirely. The mailbox overflowed with unopened letters, and grocery deliveries were left at the gate rather than brought to the door as they had been in better times. Inside the mansion, hidden from public view, the reality was even more heartbreaking. Rooms that had once displayed expensive artwork now featured empty walls with faded rectangles, marking where paintings had hung before being sold. Guillaume's personal study became a makeshift medical center filled with wheelchairs, oxygen tanks, and prescription bottles that revealed the extent of his declining health. Perhaps most tragically, family members who occasionally visited discovered notebooks and journals that Guillaume had kept during his darkest periods. These handwritten pages revealed a man struggling not just with physical illness, but with deep depression and the crushing weight of watching his life's achievements slip away piece by piece. The confident voice that had once commanded television screens now expressed fear, loneliness, and a growing sense that his story was approaching an ending he had never imagined possible. The mansion that had once symbolized Guillaume's triumph over adversity had become a tomb for his dreams, where every empty room told the story of a fortune lost and a spirit slowly breaking under the weight of circumstance. As Guillaume entered his final years, even those closest to him began to wonder if he would ever emerge from behind those rusted gates again. A legend's last breath in the house he built. In his final years, Robert Guillaume's world had shrunk from a sprawling mansion to a single bedroom where he spent most of his days surrounded by faded photographs and Emmy awards that served as bittersweet reminders of the heights he had once reached. The prostate cancer that had first appeared in the 1990s had returned with a vengeance, spreading throughout his body despite decades of treatments and medical interventions. Guillaume's once powerful frame became frail and weak, requiring constant assistance for even the most basic daily activities. The bedroom that had once been his private retreat became his entire universe, equipped with medical equipment and staffed by nurses who provided round-the-clock care. From his bed, Guillaume could still see glimpses of the San Fernando Valley through his window, but the panoramic views that had once filled him with pride now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. The man who had commanded television screens and Broadway stages was now confined to a space no larger than a hotel room, dependent on others for his most basic needs. As 2017 progressed, it became clear that Guillaume's long battle was nearing its end. Family members began making more frequent visits to the Encino mansion, understanding that their time with the beloved patriarch was running short. The house, that had been so quiet for years, suddenly filled with the hushed conversations and gentle presence of loved ones who had come to say their final goodbyes. On October 24, 2017, at the age of 89, Robert Guillaume took his last breath in the same house where he had once celebrated his greatest triumphs. He died peacefully, surrounded by family members who held his hands and whispered words of love and gratitude for the incredible life he had lived. His wife Donna, who had stood by him through decades of illness and financial hardship, was at his bedside as he slipped away. Guillaume's death marked more than just the end of one man's remarkable journey. It represented the closing of an era in American television, when shows like Benson could make household names out of actors who brought intelligence, dignity, and groundbreaking representation to primetime television. The little boy from St. Louis, who had defied every odd stacked against him, had lived to see his character become a cultural icon, and his voice bring joy to millions through The Lion King. The mansion that had witnessed Guillaume's greatest celebrations and deepest struggles now stood as a silent monument to a life that had touched countless people across multiple generations. In those final moments, surrounded by love in the home he had worked so hard to build, Guillaume found the peace that had eluded him during his most difficult years. But even as Guillaume's story came to its quiet conclusion, questions remained about what would happen to the estate that had been both his greatest symbol of success and his most expensive burden. When the cameras stopped rolling forever, the silence that followed Guillaume's death was broken not by mourning, but by the harsh reality of unpaid bills and financial documents that revealed the shocking truth about what remained of his once magnificent fortune. In the days immediately after Guillaume's passing, his family found themselves drowning in grief, while simultaneously confronting a mountain of paperwork that told the devastating story of his final years. Donna Guillaume, already emotionally shattered by the loss of her husband, discovered that the medical expenses from his decades-long battle with cancer and stroke recovery had consumed virtually everything they had worked so hard to build. The numbers were staggering and heartbreaking. Guillaume's estate was valued at approximately $500,000, a fraction of the $8 million fortune he had accumulated at the height of his fame. Years of round-the-clock medical care, specialized treatments, prescription medications, and home health care services had drained his savings account by account. The residual payments from Benson and The Lion King, that had once seemed like a permanent safety net, had been insufficient to cover the astronomical costs of keeping Guillaume alive and comfortable. Donna faced an impossible decision that no grieving widow should have to make. The Encino mansion, that had been their home for decades, was now their most valuable asset, but it was also the place where she had cared for her husband and where their happiest memories lived. Keeping the house meant struggling with ongoing maintenance costs, property taxes, and utilities that her reduced income could barely cover. Selling it meant abandoning the last physical connection to the life she and Guillaume had built together. Meanwhile, news of Guillaume's death spread throughout the entertainment industry, sparking an outpouring of tributes from fellow actors, directors, and fans who remembered his groundbreaking work. Social media filled with clips of his most memorable Benson moments and scenes from The Lion King, where his voice had brought wisdom and humor to millions of children. Celebrities who had attended those legendary parties at his mansion shared stories of Guillaume's kindness, intelligence, and trailblazing career. The tributes were touching and sincere, but they couldn't change the harsh financial reality that Guillaume's family now faced. The same industry that celebrated his contributions had moved on long before his death, leaving him and his family to struggle with the consequences of an entertainment career that had burned brightly but briefly. Television networks aired retrospectives celebrating Guillaume's career, but no royalty checks would follow these tributes. The man who had once made millions laugh every week had died with debts that threatened to erase even the modest inheritance he had hoped to leave behind. As the initial wave of grief began to subside, one question loomed larger than all others. What would become of the mansion that had witnessed both Guillaume's greatest triumphs and his most devastating defeats? What lies behind those silent windows? Today, nearly 7 years after Guillaume's death, his former Encino mansion stands as a haunting reminder of how quickly fame can fade, surrounded by whispered rumors and unanswered questions about what really happens behind those darkened windows. The property's fate remains shrouded in mystery, with conflicting reports about whether Donna Guillaume managed to keep the family home or was ultimately forced to sell it to pay off the mounting debts. Real estate records suggest the mansion changed hands quietly sometime after Guillaume's death, but the new owners have maintained an almost supernatural level of privacy that has only fueled neighborhood speculation about the property's current condition. Neighbors in the exclusive Encino community have reported strange occurrences around the Guillaume estate that seem to defy logical explanation. Some claim to have seen lights flickering in windows late at night, despite the house appearing completely vacant during daylight hours. Others whisper about hearing classical music drifting over the walls at odd hours, reminiscent of the elegant parties Guillaume once hosted. One longtime resident insists they've glimpsed a tall figure standing in the master bedroom window, silhouetted against the curtains, as if still watching over the San Fernando Valley below. The real estate market around Guillaume's former home has exploded in value, with similar properties now selling for $3 to $5 million, making his original $1 million purchase seem like a bargain in retrospect. This dramatic appreciation makes the mansion's current abandonment or neglect even more puzzling, as the property represents a significant financial asset that any rational owner would want to maintain or develop. Several historical preservation groups have attempted to designate the Guillaume mansion as a landmark worthy of protection, recognizing its significance as the home of a pioneering African-American television star who broke barriers and changed the entertainment industry. However, these efforts have been hampered by the mysterious ownership situation and the apparent unwillingness of current property holders to cooperate with preservation initiatives. The mansion's uncertain fate serves as a powerful metaphor for the broader cautionary tale that Guillaume's life represents. Hollywood is littered with similar properties, grand estates purchased during peak earning years by stars who believed their success would last forever, only to become financial burdens when careers faded and medical expenses mounted. These empty mansions stand as silent monuments to the entertainment industry's cruel mathematics, where million-dollar salaries can evaporate as quickly as television ratings. Guillaume's story reminds us that even the most successful entertainers are just a few bad breaks away from losing everything they've worked to build. The mansion that once symbolized his triumph over poverty and prejudice now represents the fragility of fame and the harsh reality that in Hollywood, yesterday's headlines become tomorrow's forgotten history. As we look back on Guillaume's remarkable journey from St. Louis tenements to Encino mansions and back to financial uncertainty, his legacy serves as both inspiration and warning for anyone who dares to chase the American dream.